May 7th, 2019, Hamburg, event marketing rockstars, one of the most prestigious business events in Germany. The woman you see on stage now is 25-year-old Verena Balsan.
My name is Verena. I am the fourth generation of the Balsan family. We have been baking cakes for 130 years. I want to do an experiment with you and see what happens. I wish I hadn't tried to say something supposedly clever today.
Balsan is the company responsible for products such as the popular Leibniz crackers, among others. In fact, it's hard not to know them because when I was younger and they just weren't in the house, I would take chocolate and other crackers and make similar ones myself. You probably know them too, but less so. The Balsan family is one of the wealthiest families in Germany, yet listen to Verena's statement.
Before you ask me, I want to say one thing. I am a capitalist. I own 1/4 of the shares in Balsan. I'm happy about it. I want to keep it. I want to make money and buy yachts with my dividends.
Apart from the fact that what Verena said is horrifying, her family's wealth did not come about by itself, and certainly not honestly. Well, several generations earlier, her family had exploited the labor of forced laborers, including those from Eastern Europe, during the Third Reich. Verena's statement was quickly picked up by the press, but she decided to ramble on, explaining that she didn't care what her family had done a few generations earlier, and that forced laborers were paid the same as Germans.
Without forced labor, production could not be maintained, because they knew that the war effort meant that so many workers were missing, and at the same time, production requirements were very high. 770 women, mostly from Eastern Europe, had been working at Balsan since 1942. They lived in centralized camps. The company had little influence on the poor living conditions there.
This is one of the more notorious cases described by David de Jong in his book, and material about it was also prepared by the Fern Channel. Unfortunately, there are really many such cases in Germany, and Germany's power was not born out of nothing. Germany's path to becoming a global economic powerhouse, known as the German economic miracle, or Wirtschaftswunder, had its beginnings at the end of World War II, when most of the country was in ruins. The main role in this success is attributed to the figure of the brilliant Walter Eucken and the Marshall Plan. However, such a revival would not have been fully possible without the earlier exploitation of people for experiments and the massive plundering of Europe. Therefore, in today's material, we will look at the dark side of Germany's prosperity and the resurgence of extreme, even pro-Hitler sentiments in that country. I invite you to view the material. The Reichsleiter Rosenberg Task Force, or ERR for short, was a Nazi Party organization dedicated to the appropriation of cultural property during World War II. It was headed by the Nazi Party's chief ideologue, Alfred Rosenberg. The massive looting of art, technology, and other goods was carried out in this way. This is how the looting routes looked on the map.
The Führer appointed me Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories.
As early as March 1938, when the Third Reich annexed Austria, 78 tons of gold worth nearly $100 million disappeared from the vaults of the Austrian National Bank. Between 1939 and 1945, the Third Reich looted the equivalent of more than 2 trillion euros, twice as much as the Polish economy generates annually almost 100 years later. In the words of German historian Jochen Böhler, the goods looted by the ERR were later returned to their owners, but the true extent of the restitution will never be known because many of these people are either dead or have no way of gathering adequate evidence that the item belonged to their family before the war. A good way to clear your name. In the end, we good Germans will give it back to you. Just give proof that it is yours. Well, if the picture hung in some house for many years, all proof could have been lost long ago. And as you probably know very well, the photograph was not popular at all. The documents could have been lost after all.
Here is the bombardment of Rotterdam. During that night you heard the planes from the Germans come. And we knew that the war started. It was a terrible moment. And they came creeping over the railway in our garden that morning, the 10th of May, I'll never forget that. They stole everything. They knew every place where you had been hiding the thing. You can't imagine when you come home and nothing is left.
In Munich museums alone, there are 4,400 paintings and 770 sculptures looted during the war and estimated to be worth tens of millions of euros. Trying to estimate how many more possessions are hidden in German homes is another story altogether. After all, some time ago, a silver eagle was bought by a random German at a Swiss market and looted from the throne room of the royal castle in Warsaw. The fate of the other 85 remains unknown. There are dozens of reports, such as the Bigelow Report, declassified only on December 31st, 1996, and published in 1997, which states that in 1945, the Vatican confiscated 350 million Swiss francs, or $1.5 billion at the 2020 exchange rate, in Nazi gold for safekeeping, of which 150 million Swiss francs were confiscated by British authorities at the Austrian-Swiss border. In all of this, there are figures like Victor Capesius, a pharmacist at Auschwitz who presided over the mass extraction of gold teeth from murdered prisoners. In this way, according to the Polish website Historical Curiosities, the Germans obtained between 29 and 34 kilograms of gold per day. This was a source of huge profits for the SS. When the war was over, Victor Capesius did not hand over the gold to the Third Reich, but quickly stole gold even with pieces of bone, and later lived to a peaceful old age in Vienna, owning prosperous cafes. We could go on for dozens of hours about the looting of the Germans, and much of this information is difficult to verify. But what is certain is that hiding these funds in banks, cellars, or other nooks and crannies enabled the Germans to rebuild more quickly after the war. Wartime plunder, gruesome experiments, and the use of the labor of people from occupied countries built a powerful German economy, making Germany the third largest economy in the world today. Of course, this success cannot be attributed to robbery alone, as the Germans have organized great supply chains and have always focused on productivity. However, there is no doubt that the hidden capital in the free market era at the time of the sale was like a non-repayable loan to unleash a powerful economic machine and enabled the creation of powerful German families whose influence extends far beyond Germany. That is who we will now look at. Günter Quandt and his son, Herbert Quandt, were once members of the Nazi Party and patriarchs of the family that now dominates the BMW Group. Before we tell their story, let's take a look at the fortunes of their descendants who manage the family's assets. Stefan Quandt owns 23.6% of the BMW brand. His sister, Susanne Klatten, Germany's richest woman, owns 19.1%. The former's wealth alone is estimated at $23.2 billion, but there are more heirs. Estimates of their combined wealth range from $35 billion to as much as $55 billion. Stefan Quandt alone is the 93rd richest man in the world.
Germany is a founding country. What did people like Karl von Linde or Robert Bosch, who were among the founders, are entrepreneurs today?
What is the history of this family, which is one of the most important voices in BMW? If you go back to the figure of Günter Quandt and his son Herbert Quandt, they were, as I said, former members of the Nazi Party. Herbert Quandt was in charge of the battery factories in Berlin, where thousands of forced and slave laborers worked, including hundreds of women from concentration camps, and he took over companies stolen from Jews in France and used prisoners of war and forced laborers on his private estate.
But such an entrepreneur needs to know what is going on in his company. No one is going to say that he only occasionally checked the batteries that were being produced and didn't go to the production line at all. It's simply impossible.
After the war, Günter Quandt was arrested on charges of collaborating with the Nazis, but was acquitted after falsely claiming that he had been forced to join the party by Goebbels. The family was already wealthy before the war, but took advantage of favorable wartime conditions to multiply their wealth by using slave labor. During the war, Herbert Quandt was personnel director of the family factory. During his tenure as director, he personally oversaw the deaths of 40 to 80 people per month through the use of slave labor, with each slave remaining alive for about 6 months. This turnover was due in large part to the concentration of acid gas in the air of the factory where slave labor was forced to work. Germany then gained the know-how and ability to produce car batteries en masse, becoming one of the world's largest exporters.
This family wants to hide and forget its history and the origin of its wealth, its social significance, and the reasons for it all. In summary, the Quandt family made their fortune through forced labor, which is linked to the Second World War and German war aims, etc. This fortune is also the basis of their current economic importance and social influence. And of course it is strange that such a company, the Quandt family, does not face these facts, its history, companies like BMW.
Another example, Ferdinand Porsche convinced Hitler to put the Volkswagen Garbus into mass production. The company grew to gigantic proportions under his son, Ferry Porsche, who volunteered for the SS, became an officer, and was later never found for the rest of his life because he lied about what he was actually doing. Ferry Porsche designed the first Porsche sports car and surrounded himself with former SS members in the 1950s and 1960s. Its facilities used slave labor, including prisoners from Auschwitz, and the exact number of labor victims at these facilities remains unknown. Today, Volkswagen is still the world's second largest automaker, and the auto industry alone accounts for up to 10% of Germany's gigantic economy, an industry that might not have existed without the war and Hitler and his collaborators.
On the basis of this expose, he probably agreed with Hitler that he wanted a vehicle that could carry 4 people. It was to travel at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour, weigh 650 kilograms, and consume 7 liters of petrol. I think 7 liters of petrol. These were Hitler's basic requirements. The Führer awards the German state prize to designer Dr. Ferdinand Porsche in 1938.
David de Jong, in his book Nazi Billionaires, tells the story of 5 German families who became rich by collaborating with the Nazis, namely Quandt, Flick, von Fink, Porsche Piech, and Oetker. Today, descendants of these people run companies such as BMW, Dr. Oetker, Porsche, and, for example, Allianz. After the end of World War II, the Allies did not have much time to hold Germany accountable for its past, so in the face of the growing power of the Soviet Union, German power had to be restored quickly, sometimes leaving behind all the wealth looted by the Nazis and the know-how that also came from human experimentation. Today, Germany's chemical and medical industries are among the most powerful in the world, and they wouldn't exist without the Nazis and their experiments. For example, some 150,000 forced laborers work for what was once the world's largest chemical company, IG Farben, which was broken up in 1951 to 1952 into Bayer, BASF, and Hoechst, now part of Sanofi Aventis, among others. One of IG Farben's companies, Degesch, produced the Zyklon B used in the gas chambers of the concentration camps, and several Bayer-affiliated doctors conducted medical experiments on prisoners to test new drugs. Unfortunately, in Germany today, the AfD sometimes calls for an end to the era of remembering German crimes, and sometimes even praises the successes of the former Germany that built its power in this dark way. That's all from me for today. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next material. Bye.
The more we think about it and the more we are reminded of it, as they are abroad, the more I think we should try to forget it. There are very similar things in other countries that have happened all over the world. Nobody talks about it anymore, and it doesn't have a negative connotation. For us, it is always negative.